of this heliocentrism and the Luciferian scientific dictatorship. And no, I'm not going to read that ridiculous subtitle again this time. We're going to go right on to it. Starting off, we got Aristarchus, or however you pronounce it. Don't expect me to pronounce everything correctly, because I just don't care. Okay? If I know how to pronounce it, I will. But if I don't, I just don't care. All right? Aristarchus, famous Greek mathematician and astronomer, popular for his theories regarding the heliocentrism of our solar system. He was the first to say that the sun and not the earth was the center of our universe. This theory brought him ridicule during his lifetime. Well, deservedly so, obviously. Look at the irony. Aristarchus was one of the first astronomers to calculate the relative sizes of the sun, moon, and the earth. He did this by observing the moon during a lunar eclipse and by estimating the angle and the size of the earth. Okay, so we have obvious huge problems where we're assuming the inputs, or we're assuming the data or whatever to do these problems. It's obviously ridiculous. So he's triangulating, right? Which makes sense if you do know how big the earth is and you do know how big the moon is. But we don't. The principal results on the sphere and the cylinder in two books are that the same surface area of any sphere of the radius is 4 times that of its greatest circle, and that the volume of a sphere is 2/3 that of the cylinder in which it is inscribed. Okay? Archimedes published his works in the form of correspondence with the principal mathematicians of his time, including Alexandrian scholars Conon of Samos and Aristophanes. There has, however, been handed down a set of numbers attributed to him, giving the distances of the various heavenly bodies of Earth, which has been shown to be based not on observed astronomical data, but on a Pythagorean theory associated with the spatial intervals between the planets with musical intervals. So the music of the spheres. Religious dogma. It is surprising though it is to find those metaphysical speculations in the work of a practicing astronomer. Really? The concept of the center of gravity were established on a mathematical basis by scholars earlier than this guy. His contribution was rather to extend those concepts to the conic sections. Moving on. This is Archimedes' Lodge, because it's a religion, of course. So it's kind of like you'll have like a St. Paul's whatever church. I mean, forget about all the Catholics not being Christian and all that kind of stuff. But you know what I'm talking about when I say St. Paul's Cathedral or whatever it may be. That's because Paul is a figure in that religion. So it makes sense that they would name something after it. These guys are in a religion. So it would make sense that they name things after their so-called prophets. Ptolemy. Virtually nothing is known about Ptolemy's life except for what can be inferred from his writings. For starters. Ptolemy also devised 2 ways of drawing a grid of lines on a flat map to represent the circles of latitude and longitude of the globe. His grid gives a visual impression of the Earth's spherical surface and also, to a limited extent, preserves the proportionality of distances. Almagast, and again, I'm still laying the groundwork of this cult and how it got to where it is now. And then I'll be going in on all these people like Jack Parsons and all that. So, Almagast, from a hybrid of Arabic and Greek, the greatest, was called by Ptolemy the mathematical collection, because he believed that its subject, the motions of the heavenly bodies, could be explained in mathematical terms. Explained. You can't be serious, you guys. Earth, he argued, is a stationary sphere at the center of a vastly larger celestial sphere that revolves at a perfectly uniform rate around Earth, carrying with it the stars. Yeah, no crap, it's perfectly uniform. It's because they're. Anyway, revolves at a perfectly uniform rate around Earth, carrying with it the stars, planets, sun, and moon, thereby causing their daily risings and settings. Through the course of a year, the sun slowly traces out a great circle known as the ecliptic against the rotation of the celestial sphere. So basically, you have these people forging what was going to be the standard. In my opinion, these old cultists actually believed what they were saying. I think they I think they put their religious dogma in front of them that the earth was a sphere and that there was these heavenly spheres and all that. And I think at some point this is speculation. I think at some point they realized they were wrong. And so the only choice was to reverse the occult and make this globe the exoteric for the peasants. But anyway, not the peasants, the profane, whatever they want to call them. Tycho Brahe buttoned up against them, pointed out that the solar observations Ptolemy claimed to have made in 141 are definitely not genuine and that there are strong arguments for doubling that. Ptolemy independently observed the more than 1,000 stars listed in his star catalog. However, it's the mastery of mathematical analysis that Ptolemy exhibited. So, on to Aristophanes, another egghead. Okay. This is the dude that assumed the sun's distance to be very great and its rays, therefore, are practically parallel when they reach Earth. Oh, you don't say. These people just go on like a mushroom trip and just imagine what the universe is, and then all of a sudden it's just a fact. It's like, really? The sun is 4,000 miles away, and how do you know that? So, what this dude is saying, you got the well and the obelisk and all that, and some say two sticks, two wells, two obelisks, whatever. The premise is the surface of the earth has to be curving if we have different shadows, or it could just be a local light. It's that simple. It really is. And again, this is not a scientific or a natural law or any of that type of presentation. And I almost even put the black swan right here in, but I took it back out because that's not what this presentation is for. There's other people who are way better about that stuff than me. So this dude assumed that it was exactly 5,000 stadia from Syene to Alexandria, asinine. Assumed that Syene was, even if he claimed he measured that, I still wouldn't believe him. Assumed that Syene was directly on the Tropic of Cancer, another just complete and utter failure for just that one reason alone. Assumed that Syene and Alexandria were on the same meridian, like I said, directly on the Tropic of Cancer. I said, okay, sorry. Assume that the Earth was a sphere and a perfect one, and assume that the sun emits parallel rays, and assume the moon was 780 miles away, and that the sun was 4,080 miles away. So how does that make sense that I've got 16-year-old kids telling me in 2022 that the sun is 93 million miles away, and that Aristophanes proved the globe? Okay, so this is not a measurement, for one. This is just LARPing around and playing with sticks. This is the map that Aristophanes made. It's an interesting map. Europe, Libya, Asia, Scythia. It's interesting. Hipparchus created the discipline of trigonometry. He calculated the length of the lunar month with an error of less than 1 second and estimated the solar year with an error of 6 minutes. Although he is commonly ranked among the greatest scientists of antiquity, very little is known about his life, and only one of his many writings is still in existence. Knowledge of the rest of his work relies on second-hand reports, especially in the great astronomical compendium, the Almagest, written by Ptolemy in the 2nd century. Hipparchus assumed a spherical, stationary Earth at the center of the universe. See, as part of this dogmatic religion, it still needed to be a sphere. So it was okay if there was some of them arguing that maybe it should be geocentric, but as long as it was a sphere, because it has religious connotations. All right. I decided to put the intro from this article. I didn't put, because otherwise I'll bore people to death with a bunch of pages from this article. So if you want to read this article, you can. I'm just going to read the intro. So this is called Gnostic Liberation. Wait, excuse me. Sorry about that. I had a cough for a second. Gnostic Liberation from the Astrological Determinism. Okay. Of all the intellectual systems of late antiquity, whether religious, philosophical, or some combination thereof, perhaps the one constructed by the Gnostics presented the most radically innovative view of things, for it quite literally demonized the cosmos. Right. Let's see. Back where I was. Literally demonized the cosmos, being neither the embodiment of the Stoics' rational, all-pervading logos, nor the result of the well-intentioned Platonic demiurge's desire to emulate the ideal forms, nor an expression of the Old Testament's God's glory and wisdom. The cosmos instead stemmed entirely from evil. All other ancient views, as Hans Blumenberg has demonstrated, preserve at least a residue of trust in the cosmos. Consequently, Gnostics pursued their radical critique of the cosmos further than any group, finding in the seemingly regular, predictable motions of the heavens only the expression of a malevolent plot designed to deceive and entrap them. So the stars are evil. This perspective thus predisposed them to view celestial irregularity as signifying the possibility of a higher, more benevolent force, for such might suggest evidence of an extra-cosmic intervention in the world by a more powerful God of salvation. This article will argue that at least some Gnostics, used Hipparchus's discovery of the precession of the equinoxes as evidence for such intervention in the world by the soterical God. A miraculous intervention that successfully shifted the zodiacal sphere to break the bonds of astrological fate and release the Gnostic elect from the power of the cosmos and its creator. That had to be written by a Gnostic, by the way. That was way too poetic to not be written by. But read between the lines. Zero in on what it's saying right here. On this article will argue that at least some Gnostics used Hipparchus's discovery of the precession of the equinoxes as evidence for the intervention in the world. So this whole theory they have is being the impetus. They needed an impetus to prove this theory, and Hipparchus provided it. This precession of the equinox just magically happened to provide the ground that the Gnostics wanted to stand on. What a coincidence. So we have a chicken or the egg type of argument here, right? So this guy writing this article, who's probably a Gnostic himself, that's just random speculation by me. But so we have this article of this guy writing about Gnostics. And so he's drawing the connection, but it doesn't necessarily mean that Hipparchus was aware of what the Gnostics planned to do with that information. And it's not proof that Hipparchus was a Gnostic himself. And it's also not proof of what I think it is, a panel of people, a group of Gnostics, putting their writings in the form of a character like Hipparchus. Because that's how they could propel. They created these characters to propel these narratives. In my opinion, that's my speculation. So my only point is this article is pointing out the connection, not necessarily the chicken or the egg type of proof. But to take it a step past that, I would say, again, this is just my opinion based on the facts. Okay. I think that these old writers, these old Greek writers, are a panel of people writing. And it's not, these characters didn't even exist, in my opinion. Socrates, for example, that stuff was not written by one person. In my opinion, That was not one person that wrote that. Okay? So let me go back to this for a second. So, in my, like I was saying, I think you have a religious group that is putting their writings into a form of an archetypal character. And to me, that makes infinitely more sense than all these isolated characters. Let me see this article, equinox evidence, and look at the language. Procession of equinox evidence for intervention in the world by the satirical god, a miraculous intervention that successfully shifted the zodiacal sphere to break the bonds of astrological fate. So when it says break the bonds of astrological fate, if you notice what it's saying is up till then, nobody had this theory about the cosmos being evil. And they needed something to justify it. And in my opinion, it's not a coincidence that Hipparchus provided. So let's move on and not beat that to death. He invented the armillary, spear, and astrolabe. And we got the... So there's people who push this whole sextant argument and all that. I'm not going to go there. I've already challenged people on that and went there with all that. I don't push that myself. But in general, sextants are using the horizon or an artificial one. And for you to get multiple measurements and for you to actually get where you're going, there's no way you could do that on a globe. So I would say multiple measurements, there's no way that you're doing that on a globe successfully in navigating. As far as somebody saying that it's impossible to even get a measurement, that's asinine. And that's all I'll say about that. We owe to Hipparchus the general rejection of the sun-centered planetary system proposed by Aristarchus of Samos during the 3rd century. Hipparchus concluded that the geocentric model better explained observations than did the model of Aristarchus. The only way the sun-centered model could stand mathematical analysis was by supposing an elliptical orbit of the Earth. And this supposition was something that was... this is something that Hipparchus was not willing to accept, since it was established consensus among astronomers at the time that the planetary orbits were circular. So you see what's happening here. They reverse engineered the stars. So if they got to reverse it here, they got to reverse it there. If there's either an ellipse here or there's an ellipse there. I mean, take your pick. So like when people say, oh, the azimuthal map is nothing more than the globe pushed down into a flat map. Well, you could say that all day, vice versa. It's reverse engineering. So it's going to match each other. So stop with all that shit. Hipparchus perfected the method of Aristophanes. Oh, shit. Hipparchus perfected the method of Aristophanes for charting the Earth's surface. He decided to mark off lines completely around the sphere. Yeah, right. He's talking about like longitude, latitude lines. That threw me off. He decided to mark off lines completely around the sphere, I wish, parallel to the equator and at equal intervals. Oh, in his mind he did that. My bad. Okay. Or paper. Let's give him paper. Oh, wait. Did these old Greeks have paper in writing? That's something else altogether. He decided to mark off the lines completely around the sphere, parallel to the equator and at equal intervals. Then he marked off the other lines at right angles to make these equally spaced at the equator. The result was a regular grid covering the entire globe. All right. So, this I find interesting. Determined to certify possible later changes, he made a catalog of the sky providing the positions of 1,080 stars by stating their precise celestial latitude and longitude. Timarchus, or however you pronounce his name, 166 years before Hipparchus, also made a chart with his own little paradigm. Comparing both charts, Hipparchus Wait, I added that in. Let's go back. Timarchus, 166 years before Hipparchus, had also made a chart Comparing both charts, Hipparchus calculated that the stars had shifted their apparent position by around 2 degrees. This is how he discovered and measured the precession of the equinox. He calculated the precession to be 36 seconds per year, an estimation of a little short according to modern calculations, which is 50. So this is so absurd. So this is providing a base for Gnosticism, and it's bullshit. So you mean to tell me some guy 166 years before, how do you even know the margin of error that he was working with or how accurate he was with what he was doing? How do you even know? You weren't there to even check his methodology or anything. You've got some random vague ass dude who made a chart, and then you take another guy's chart 166 years later and compare them, and the only difference that you find there is not a margin of error, but it's a literal deviation in your mind. That's fucking nuts, dude. Straight up. It's 160. Imagine trying to do like a survey or something these days, or some sort of study or something where you're trying to get a control group, or or whatever it may be, and the only data you get is from two random fucking retards. That's your only data input. Really? Like, I'm trying to think of a way to word it. But what if there was 1,000 of these Timarchuses and 1,000 of Hipparchuses in their respective times, or 5,000 of them? No, let's just say 1,000. 1,000 of them in their respective times, and let's say we looked at all of them and there was only a margin of error like 0.2 degrees out of all 1,000 of them. That would mean 2-degree deviation would actually mean something. This is so ridiculous. This is worse than Cavendish, you guys. Cavendish is just some old dude going to his backyard, taking rudimentary ass measurements once a day, rain, hail, shine, whatever. Just some old Freemason dude walking into his backyard. Dude, this is worse. A star chart from some random dude 166 years, and you're using that as if it's rigid and credible. This is ridiculous, man. I gotta move past this. Of course, we got the actual trigonometry of a sphere of 3959 radius, necessitating that there's curvature, right? And this is a kind of a simple visualization of a sphere, but if you notice, it's not flat. So you can actually, there's like literally physical curvature there. But in real life, there's no curvature, of course. There's just flatness everywhere you go. I mean, sometimes a they'll show like the space jump or something. You'll see Planet Arizona, where it looks like a sphere, but the whole planet is like Lake Tahoe. It's like, come on. But aside from that, though, all we see is a flat Earth. We've got some effects, right? We have some miraging, some different refraction effects, right? Some looming. So, news to the people who believe in the globe: this boat is actually not floating, despite what it looks like. I know that's hard to believe, but this boat is not floating. It's actually sitting on the water. Sinking, which is very common. You'll have when you're looking across a medium like air and moisture and all that, the objects in the distance will sink. Even geodesists have gone and done measurements where they take a measurement looking one direction and then they go to where they were looking at and look back the opposite direction, and they can see that there's been a drop in the object. So, to my knowledge, nobody's actually witnessed this so-called phenomena of rising to where something's going to lift up around the curve. I'm not sure where people made that up, but it's just fantasy, obviously. We got towering, stooping. There's many different effects, right? But for example, I'll make a quick point. You see the picture on the right of the towering side? Believe it or not, if that thing was behind the Earth, you wouldn't see any of these effects. You wouldn't even see it at all. And it's that simple. So there's all these globe Earth versus flat Earth debates and stuff. And there's the globe Earth people will actually argue that there's these different effects that are affecting the objects you're seeing and all this stuff. And it's really sad because if like look at this thing on the left. If that thing was on the other side of the earth, what are you seeing to be affected? Just stop it, you guys. This again, I'll get back to where I was. I just wanted to point out a couple things just for some sort of orientation because I've been hitting the books and going in on the actual cult, and I'll jump right back to that. But I just wanted to show this picture just because it's very, very famous in the globe cult circles. And there's 100 things that I could probably say about this. I mean, there's like 5 things that I could elaborate on. I mean, but so I'm just going to zoom in real quick. Do you see how this tapers up? I don't know if you can see the hand, my cursor or not, if it's on the video or not. But look at the end of the pylons where it gets really, really white. If you'll notice, it's tapering up and then it's tapering down. That's because you're looking at compression. Those pylons are being compressed. I hope you don't think those pylons are tapering up, do you? So at the end where it's tapering to like almost like an obelisk top there, that's a mirroring and miraging. So the very top of that triangle is mirroring the bottom, or sorry, the bottom of that triangle is mirroring the top of that triangle. This is compression. And it's more exaggerated at the horizon. So this is not Earth curvature, you guys. If this was Earth curvature, the Earth would be super, super tiny. And if this is Earth curvature, where's it at right here? Oh, yeah, that's right, because this is clearly compression and refraction. Okay? It's actually very, very simple. I know people will spend a lot of time on this, say, well, the camera's offset, which is true. The shadows, it looks photoshopped and this and that. You're probably right, but none of that matters. Just zoom in on this. That's compression. End of story. So why would I be able to get a panoramic 360 where the horizon seems to be at eye level? That's weird. Philo Judaeus. We'll do a few more slides here. I think I'm gonna end on Al-Biruni pretty soon here. So Philo, who we all know about, Greek-speaking Jewish philosopher, the most important representative of Hellenistic Judaism. His writings provide the clearest view of this development of Judaism in the diaspora. A number of works ascribed to Plato are almost certainly spurious. Most important of these is the Biblical Antiquities, an imaginative reconstruction of Jewish history from Adam to the death of Saul, the first king of Israel. Scholars at an early date pointed out resemblances to Plato, but there are also expressions and phrases taken from Aristotle, as well as from Attic orators and historians, and poetic phrases and allusions to the poets. Sounds like a culture to me. Philo's works are rambling, having little sense of form, repetitious, artificially rhetorical, and almost devoid of sense of humor. His style is generally involved, elusive, strongly tinged with mysticism, and often obscure. This may be a result of a deliberate attempt on his part to discourage all but the initiated few, like they did with what was that? That Ayn Rand thing that they loaded up with a bunch of anti-Christian nonsense so that no one could get through the first 600 pages. It sounds like a bunch of BS, but look at what it says. This may be a result of a deliberate attempt on his part to discourage all but the initiated few. Initiated few? I thought I was a conspiracy theorist for saying that Judaism was a secret society. I thought I was an idiot and a moron, an uneducated, just piece of shit. What happened to that? The key influences on Philo's philosophy were Plato, Aristotle, the Neo-Pythagoreans. Yeah, this isn't a cult at all. There's no theme here that continues at all, right? The Cynics and the Stoics. Philo's basic philosophic outlook is Platonic, so much that Jerome and other church fathers quote that apparently is widespread, saying either Plato Philanizes or Philo Platonizes. Philo's conception of the matter out of which the world was created is entirely unbiblical and un-Jewish. He is here wholly at one with Plato and the Stoics. According to him, God does not create the world stuff, but finds it ready at hand. God cannot create it, as in its nature, it resists all contact with the divine. Excuse me. So that's kind of the basic. It's an interesting idea. It's like the idea of the potter versus the person who created the clay. They're saying that he's just a potter or a gardener. Like you go into the garden and you're making things happen, but you didn't invent and create the dirt. So it's that whole kind of thing. Let's see. God does not create the world stuff, but finds it ready at hand. Yep. Philo frequently compares God to the architect. So that's why you'll hear like people say God is dead, or you'll hear people say God built the world, but he's dead. This is where that type of idea is coming from. Or in Freemasonry, like it's saying here by Philo, the great architect, right? They're saying that he's an architect, that he is literally was given the materials and just built the stuff, but he didn't create the materials. But anyway, the mantle as symbol of heaven with its two zodiac shoulder plates representing the two hemispheres with 6 signs each. The hemispheres is religious. For like those two stones, the portion below the earth and that over the earth are both equal. Neither of them is by nature adapted to be either increased or diminished, like the moon. So it's like a duality type of thing. He lists as additional evidence the color of the stars. For to the glance of the eye, the appearance of the heaven does resemble an emerald, and it follows necessarily that 6 names are engraved on each of the stones because each of the hemispheres cuts the zodiac in 2 parts, and in this way comprehends within itself 6 signs of the zodiac. So this is fundamental um, intellectual religious psychobabble about what the world could be, right? And he's saying, so we got 6 hemispheres instead of 112 zodiac, right? And then it goes into the origins of the zodiac and all that. I'm not going to go into that right here. This right here goes into the how they're basically saying how extraordinary it is that these stars and stuff are just so fixed and so consistent. We already detect the influence of Hellenistic philosophy on Jewish thought in the biblical book of Ecclesiastes and the later apocryphal work, Wisdom of Sirach, 30 BC, displays Platonic and Pythagorean affinities. So it is clear that by Philo's time, Jewish thinkers of the diaspora were quite comfortable with Greek philosophy. In the work of Philo himself, there is an attempt to square Old Testament theology with the Greek philosophical tradition, leading Philo to posit Moses as the first sage and teacher of the venerable ancients of the Greek tradition. The work of Philo was to have an immense influence on the emerging Christian philosophy, especially in the work of Origen. That's a classic debate. I'm not getting into that. But I'm going to wrap it up here with Al-Biruni. So obviously, we've got a whole nother culture now, right? Up to now, we've had quite a theme going here, where it's generally the same culture, right? So why would this culture be getting involved with geodesy and all this? It's very, very complex, but I'm gonna try to keep it simple and just stick to Al-Biruni himself, and then I'll address the general area where he's from. Abu Rahim Al-Biruni is considered one of the intellectual giants of humankind. He was an astronomer, physicist, and geographer that distinguished himself as linguist and historian too. Al-Biruni was born in 973 AD at the district of Kath, the old capital of Khorasan, or however you say it, a town situated near the Aral Sea. He had his first teacher and educated Greek. His foster father, Mansur, a member of the royal family and distinguished mathematician and astronomer, introduced him to Euclidean geometry and Ptolemy astronomy. So hold on. We got this high level royal family adopting this kid and teaching him Greek, teaching him astronomy, teaching him Euclidean geometry. And who was Euclid? Euclid was part of the founding of this cult. Muslim geodesy, that is, the measurement of the arc corresponding to 1 degree of latitude ordered by Abbasid Caliph Al-Ma'mun during his reign. I'm not trying to disrespect people. I just really am bad about that, how to pronounce stuff. And we're almost done here. I'm going to wrap this up in a couple more slides for part 2, and then we'll do part 3 another time. In geodesy, and I think Copernicus and stuff will be on the next one. So in geodesy, a meridian arc is the distance between 2 points within the same longitude. Measurements of arcs at different latitudes allow determining a reference ellipsoid, which can be used to define the figure of Earth. Assuming our planet as a sphere, assuming our Earth is a planet, assuming our Earth is a sphere, it is enough to measure a single arc from which it is to easily obtain the Earth's circumference. It's so easy to get the circumference, as long as you completely imagine the globe. No problem, right? Here's a statue of Al-Biruni at the United Nations. The same people that have a flat Earth map. First, he determined the elevation of a hill, and then he climbed the hill, and he measured the angle of the dip to the horizon. You don't say. So what would happen if Al-Biruni came this day in the middle of the freaking day to Lake Pontchartrain? And what if he went later in the day and got a different result? Wouldn't that make his results change? Using an Arabic mile equal to 1.225947 English miles, interesting number there. Al-Biruni value of the radius, which was equal to 3928.77 English miles, which compares favorably, being a difference of 2% with the mean radius of curvature of the reference ellipsoid at the latitude of measurement. This mean radius is of 3847.80 miles. He did this when he was at the fort of Nandana in Punjab. So this is so bizarre that these people are imagining a sphere and mathematically projecting stuff. Dude, this is so incredibly weird. It's strange times, man. Very, very bizarre. I mean, really. Around 1005, of course, Al-Biruni wrote a little work on the mapping of the globe entitled The Flat Projection of Figures and Balls. So, as you can tell by the title, it would appear that the implication is that balls came before Al-Biruni, right? But like I said, it doesn't matter, because when you're reverse engineering things, you have vice versa of each other. So you could endlessly argue about what is what, a projection of what. It's reverse engineered. That's pointless to argue about. In this treatise, Al-Biruni discussed 8 types of projections. One is the azimuthal equidistant projection, today used for polar projections, which shows all meridians as straight lines, the flag of the United Nations, blah, blah. Okay? So I think I'm going to wrap this up. I did want to mention this part only because he comes from a connected family. Modern historians regard al-Mansur as one of the greatest caliphs of the Abbasid Caliphate. With the rise of the Abbasid Caliphate and the establishment of its capital in Baghdad in the middle of the 8th century, the old and populous Babylonian Jewish community, the largest center of rabbinic Judaism, found itself at the hub of an Islamic empire that extended from Spain and Morocco to the west and India and Afghanistan in the east. I'm sure that that had nothing to do with how this guy was somehow adopted and taught Euclidean geometry, right? There's absolutely no possible way that there's a connection, right? I'm gonna leave it at that. I'm gonna wrap this up. This has been part 2. I'll be back with part 3, Copernicus and some other folks in there, and then we'll keep it moving. Thank you guys for checking it out.